Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action, a service of Project Sentinel and the London Centr for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani. I'll be your host and moderator. The Green Agenda, as it has been called, has been a dominant force, arguably, in what has happened with our economy, political discourse, and our culture, that is. There are powerful factions within several Western powers which have stopped at nothing to push this climate change agenda. This is also a major financial cost to their nations and citizens living within their borders with little regard for any of the ripple effects. How far might this have gone, and how far might it go? Well, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon floated the idea of the government using eminent domain to seize private property to achieve the Green Agenda's political goals. What are the chances of this happening? How may it be done? And how can this kind of thing be stopped? We're talking about it here with our panel from Project Sentinel and the London Centr for Policy Research. First, our president, Tony Shaffer, Lieutenant Colonel retired. We also have Navy Captain retired Pete O'Brien. He's the Project Sentinel chairman and distinguished fellow at the London Centr for Policy Research. Project Sentinel and London Centr's senior fellow Jay Homnick is also with us. And we have a special guest speaker, author, analyst, and host of the Truth Central podcast, Dr. Jerome Corsi. Welcome, gentlemen, but let's start here. One might step back and say the idea of seizing property to set up solar farms or maybe wind turbine fields is kind of ridiculous and silly. However, if anybody remembers Kelo versus New London, houses, homes, they could be taken by the government to set up something as superficial as a shopping mall. Dr. Corsi, let's get your thoughts on eminent domain and what could happen here.
Well, I think the key issue is that this case has been around for a long time. It involved a shopping mall, Kelo v. New London. And the idea was that eminent domain, which is a principle of the common good or the public interest, allows government to confiscate your private property. It's been used often, for instance, in building the interstate highways. Eminent domain was used, but you're supposed to get back fair value for your property. But the point is, it sets up a precedent in which the government can define the public good at whatever the public interest the government decides it to be. So if the public good is decided to be global warming, climate change, to prevent this, and we have to eliminate the use of hydrocarbon fuels, which I think is nonsense science. I mean, my book, The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, is really predicated on exposing the hoax science behind this carbon dioxide hysteria. We exhale carbon dioxide. It's a trace molecule in the atmosphere. It's not the major global warming effect. It's not the thermostat of the Earth to turn up or turn down the heat. It's a factor that is important as to contain the heat within the Earth. That's what these various forces of do that are concerned about. But the point is, if we let the government have this kind of authority over something that is not definitive science and is in fact questionable science for an ideological agenda, which will reduce the economic power and efficiency of the United States, not only violate our fundamental freedoms by just coming in and confiscating our property for some hypothecated public good. I mean, I think it's actually outrageous, but I think it shows the extent to which this climate change movement has become a neo-Marxist, anti-capitalist, destructive ideology rather than science, and to allow government to act on seizing property over this kind of a hoax is outrageous.
So, Chris, if I could jump in to follow that up, I'd appreciate it. As someone who actually has a degree in environmental studies, I can confirm everything Dr. Corsi said. Plus, I will go a step further to say it is completely bogus. There is no scientific basis for the green movement. It's destructive. The actual resources required to establish electric cars, the additional power that has to come from the grid to power those cars, the destruction to the environment is literally going to damage the environment beyond all recognition. You have to strip mine, you have to obtain these resources, you have to use child labor. The Chinese will be the ones dominating the materials market with lithium and cobalt. There's nothing good here. All it is, and this is why the left embraces it so vigorously, it's a rebranding of Marxism for the 21st century. The primary goal of the green energy movement is to obtain and retain control of means of production, means of energy, means of everything that relates to social interactions and culture. And the way they're doing it right now is trying to put it in terms of it's going to benefit you. I wanted to quote, do a quote from Joe Biden here. He just said this, I think, 2 days ago. This is how they work, though. Joe Biden commented on his trip to while he was in Ireland, how his job, the progressive left's job, is to, quote, make democracy deliver for everyone. What does that even mean? That's nonsense. This is the sort of weak but very nice sounding language that they use to try to convince people that what they're doing to gain and retain control of means of production, means of regulating commerce, is to benefit you. As they say in Build Back Better, you will own nothing and be happy. That's what this is all about. And I think people need to wake up to the reality. So I just wanted to throw that little set of facts in there for our discussion.
So the soundbite is the ends justify grabbing the means.
There you go. Pete, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm basically going to pile on here. The green agenda uses a series of models on absorption. One of the items they use is a series of absorption of heat in the atmosphere. And the computer models, very interestingly, you never hear people talk about this, so I'm going to raise it. The computer models they use an atmosphere that is bone dry. There's no water vapor in it. But water vapor constitutes 75% of the heat absorption of the atmosphere on a normal day. Even over the middle of the Sahara Desert, or the other great desert in the world, the Antarctica. There is enough humidity, enough water vapor in the atmosphere to constitute more than 3/4 of the absorption of radiation coming off the ground. And one of the latest boogeymen that has come up in the green world is methane. Methane constitutes 1/15,000th of the absorption of water vapor. No one's talking about getting rid of water vapor out of the atmosphere. That would be kind of silly. Yet we're talking about getting rid of cows. This is lunacy turned into policy, and now they've twisted that around so that we now have, not only is it lunacy turned into policy, part of the policy is taking beautiful farmland and destroying it and turning it into either a solar panel farm or the habitat for these gigantic windmills who are exceptionally capable of chopping up birds.
Oh, yeah.
Insanity.
Well, having said that, let's get to the policy end, gentlemen. From what you see coming out of the leaders of the Biden administration and a long presidential election season coming up through 2024, that's another factor. What would be the motivations for the current powers to either entertain or eschew the idea of using eminent domain to push or to build, let's say, solar plants, as Dimon suggested?
Well, if I can, I'm going to have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I want to weigh in on this.
Please.
The issue for the left is seizing power, and I agree with everything that's been said. The science is bogus. Greenhouse gases are essential for life on Earth. They do hold in, as we mentioned, the heat from the sun. So at nighttime, when the sun's not shining, all the irradiance doesn't escape back up into the atmosphere. We wouldn't have life on Earth as we know it without greenhouse gases. And the bogus science, which the left does not care about, truth is no longer the standard of the left. And a postmodernist world, they believe they can posit their values. John Lennon, let's imagine a world without hydrocarbon fuels. Let's imagine. Well, they essentially want to imagine a world without people. The world would be a great place if there weren't so many people. The Green Movement started as a Malthusian movement, and it was co-opted by John Holdren with Paul Ehrlich to demonstrate that if you had an existential threat, like we're all going to die if we don't stop using hydrocarbon fuels because they emit carbon dioxide, you have to demonize carbon dioxide, which any legitimate climate scientist knows is a minor factor among greenhouse gases and has a minimal effect on the Earth's temperature. But yet, the truth of that does not stop the ideological fervor for grabbing power and reducing economic activity, which ultimately has a Malthusian goal of reducing population, making us live a less sufficient standard of living, or taking our excellent standard of living and spreading it across the world. So we're dealing here with a fundamental threat, not only to freedom, but to the ability of the Earth in this interglacial warming period, which we ought to be thankful for, of being prosperous and being able to produce as many billion people as we have, that if we were intelligent instead of destructive, we could effectively support and prosper.
Absolutely. And let me just make this point very briefly, that the green agenda, it's a great word that they picked, because the trick is to make us feel like greenhorns. They want to make every subject to be, it's like your parents say, oh, you wouldn't understand. So every subject has to be some fancy science or something that is over your head. And so therefore, me as a voter, what the hell do I know about, is gases going in the atmosphere? I don't know anything. So I got to hand power up to them. They know, they're smart.
Well, I think that's the danger of having lost the access to public education at all levels, by the fact that so much of the youth now is convinced that somehow people like AOC say the world's going to end in 10 years, Al Gore, all this nonsense. Let me be very clear on this. The world is not going to end anytime soon based on natural causes relating to anything we put in the atmosphere regarding gases, CO2, methane, any of that. It's not going to have any impact that'll affect climate. People have to study long-term climate trends, such as that in geologic history. Otherwise, it's not valid. And I think this is where we've ceded control of that. And to Jay's point, part of this is when you give up understanding. If you don't understand, people like Jamie Dimon come along and propose the idea that the government should have the authority to grab any land required to support this new Green Deal fiction, which is very dangerous. It's literally Marxist. It's literally the idea that you will give the government control over your future because you don't know, you're not smart enough to understand that you, by your inaction, is causing the climate catastrophe that's going to wipe out or impact the human race. This is how dangerous this is when people like Jamie Dimon at the top, all the way down to kindergarten, and I've seen this in my kids, are told that our inability to be good stewards of the planet is going to impact on the future of mankind. Therefore, you need to trust us by letting us spend unlimited amounts of money and take unlimited access to your land and to your life to save you. It is literally that level of insane at this point.
Not to mention brainwashing your grandchildren in kindergarten.
Dr. Corsi, Dr. Corsi, I know you have to leave in a couple of moments, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well. One primary pillar of eminent domain is that the government must offer those whose land is being seized fair market value for their property. We're in an era where the dollar is declining. Real estate values are a paper tiger at this point, especially in some areas. How is this ever going to be insured from here going forward? And keep in mind, there's a history of local municipalities and the federal government, as well as all those in between, lowballing property owners.
Well, as soon as you give a power to a government, it's going to be abused. That's our founding fathers knew that. And so eminent domain, which has a certain appeal, when you're in a crisis situation, the government needs to take a step. I mean, the ancient Romans had the ability to have a dictator appointed when war was going to threaten the republic from going out of existence. But quickly that power became abused, and the republic was eliminated by the dictators. So again, there's no fair price for your freedom to own private property. And what's at stake here is a overreaching definition based on faulty science and an existential threat which does not exist, namely burning hydrocarbon fuels is going to cause us all to warm up the earth to where it's not habitable, which is a ludicrous idea. Not understanding climate science. We've had much more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere when we've had ice ages. The sun produces heat on Earth, and when the Earth gets farther away from the sun in an elliptical orbit, at its most elliptical, about every 100,000 years we have an ice age. We'll have another one, and it won't matter how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere. These are fundamental forces that are much stronger than the left is projecting, but their goal is to convince you that an existential threat, the republic's going to die, we're all going to die, justifies them seizing your property. Now, as your point, Chris, the dollar is also being debased in part because these green policies, and I don't know what's green about wind or solar. I mean, solar looks like it's yellow to me, and wind doesn't have a color. But these are ideas that are, again, value positive ways to phrase a economic theory that is destructive to capitalism, and the left knows that. And I believe the left knows that the climate science is wrong. They don't care. It's an ideological campaign, and as soon as the government exerts eminent domain in order to seize your property, forget about fair value. And yes, even if you got paid in dollars, the dollars are going to deteriorate. So, in fact, the government is not responsible any longer even for maintaining the value of our fiat currency. The left tends to destroy. Marxism does not create, it negates. And we're going through a very dark period of time in which this evil, and Tony is right, the lack of education, the fact that people don't read, don't study, aren't taught in schools, and know nothing about climate science, couldn't do a regression equation if their lives depended on it. These are times when the autocrats, those who want power, the oligarchs, the New World Order crowd that are insane depopulationists, have the ability to gain control because people aren't thinking. And it's time, instead of being woke, we should be awake to the lies we're being told in this age of disinformation.
And by the way, if you had a real science crisis, wouldn't the first thing to do would be get people to learn more science?
Yeah, you don't want that. Nobody wants that, because then they'd figure it out. They'd figure that all this is bunk, I suppose. Correct, Tony?
No, so I mean, to that point, I'm on Twitter all the time mixing up with activists who have no degree. It's like, I'm sorry, I actually am credentialed and I understand the science. Oh no, you don't understand. It's this, that, and the other. It's like, no, I do understand. You don't have a degree. You're not learned. You've done nothing except pick up the propaganda and echo that. That's it. That's all they do. There is no conscientious, well thought out review of facts as they are. And what's worse is now you have NOAA, the government agency, which is responsible for climate monitoring, cooking books, literally trying to support this leftist narrative. And so, and I think Dr. Corsi, Jerry would agree with me on this. You got to clean out the government bureaucracies of these folks who have abandoned scientific thought for a political narrative that benefits them financially because they go along with it, much like Dr. Fauci and the whole medical industry. You have the same sort of thing going on with climate science. Anytime you get a grant from the government, the predetermined outcome is that, oh yeah, there's climate, there's global warming. That's it. That's what's required. And unless you can guarantee that is an outcome, you're not going to get the grant. So you've got to fix not only the government and the fact that it's signed up to this Marxist ideology, you've got to go back and clean up the school system as well, because they've taken out of school any critical thinking, and that lack of critical thinking then is informed by this prostate almost constant pandering to this political cause, using this entire left-wing apparatus, the government process, where they've embraced the academia piece to make it work for you. They fund the academic piece, which reinforces the bad science. It's all a very, very toxic brew that we need to take advantage of understand it, and then do something to counter it.
Perfect synergy.
Yeah. It's a scientism. It's a secular religion. It's not science. The left is into narratives, and once they've got a narrative, the left says there's a scientific consensus that hydrocarbon fuels emit carbon dioxide and cause global warming. Well, they don't mean that every scientist agrees. What they mean is that scientists who are right thinking have internalized the values in which hydrocarbon fuels are evil. And so that's the consensus. It's an ideological value consensus. And it does not demand, the left no longer demands that they be fact-based. This whole create your own utopian reality is fundamental to neo-Marxism. And the attack on the culture is basically Maoism. It's a cultural Maoism. The two have combined. And what we're getting is an age of disinformation in which truth, facts, science, true science no longer matter to these people. And they will be happy to seize your freedoms because that was the original goal.
That's right. It's no coincidence that Hillary Clinton wears Mao-type pantsuits. Just saying. It's all related.
Well, that, gentlemen, I think I'm going to have to say I'll part ways with you on that
style. There we go.
And it's been a great discussion, and God bless you all. And I very much support Tony and Chris, what you're doing. And
thank you.
I'll be delighted to participate anytime you ask.
We'll see you again soon. Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Corsi. We appreciate you being on here. Okay.
None.
We have all the other gentlemen here with us here on Project Sentinel's Project Sentinel's Thrown to Action. I wanted to throw this at all of you as well. We talked about the lowballing, but there's a lot of potential for abuse when it comes to eminent domain.
Yeah,
we can talk about some of the serious cases, but
if I could jump in, Chris.
Right. I want to ask you about that, Pete. What are your thoughts on potential abuse?
Well, and you're right. It goes both ways, because on the one hand, we have the government coming in concert with a power company, for example, essentially taking, in some cases, just some of the most beautiful farmland. I'm just thinking about some of the places I've seen in the last year up and down the East Coast, taking beautiful farmland, turning it into either a wind farm or a solar panel farm, or in some cases both, and essentially eliminating that land as farmland, not just for a couple of years, but for decades. It's going to be gone. And even after the solar panels wear out in 15 or 20 years, and they do, who is going to go in there, remove the solar panels, remove the concrete pillars that they've been erected on, and then remove the chemicals that have leached out of the solar panels and into the ground, and made that soil available for farming for the people who are alive a generation from now? Who's going to do that? What is the compensation to the community that is going to take care of or pay for that loss of land, that loss of agricultural productivity? And at the same time, I just think about the driving through the mountains of Vermont, southern Vermont. I guess it was a year ago, and this beautiful, beautiful terrain, these beautiful mountains, and on top of the mountains, windmill after windmill after windmill, and which was hysterical because the windmills were all up there, and none of the blades were moving because the wind was below 8 miles an hour, and then the sides of the mountains were all covered with solar panels that were also all covered with snow. So there was these series of monstrosities that had destroyed the beauty of this terrain, had also deprived the local farmers of the grazing land that was on the bottom of the mountains, and was for a significant portion of the year, not producing any power out of it. And then the beautiful part about this is the power companies get to charge more for their energy. So,
Right.
so what is really the benefit here? Who is benefiting? Well, the power companies are benefiting because they get to charge more for their power, and they get all sorts of government tax write-offs. In putting, I get ads from the local power company here, about the subsidies they're getting from the federal government. So the subsidies they're getting from the American taxpayer to put in these more expensive energy sources, and then they get to turn around and charge me more for these power sources that have been put in benefit of our tax dollars. They get us coming and going, and in the meantime, they're destroying farmland.
So basically, we have a good setup for a joke here, which is, what do you get when you cross solar panels with wind turbines? And the answer is hot air.
Or target practice for Don Quixote. There we go. Gentlemen, people will watch this and say, oh, come on, you guys are crazy. No one's going to take my property if I stand my ground. Well, let me tell you something. Governments will work hard if they're trying to push something, especially if they have the media on their side with this green agenda. Here's some examples, and I want to throw this at you guys, and I want to hear what you think about this and maybe ways to fight back. Okay, but this is what's happened to some people. There was a couple in West Palm Beach. I believe the last name was Zemsinek or Zemiknek. I apologize if I get that wrong, but they're from West Palm Beach. They apparently they didn't have enough golf courses down there, and had to be another one built. So the powers that be, bought out most of the neighbors. These two stood their ground, wound up that everything went to become a huge mess. Property values went down, and they wound up being forced out anyway. Guess what happened? Nothing. The golf course wasn't even built. How about that? This guy what happened in New Hempstead? In New Hempstead, New York. North Hempstead. Excuse me. Two different things. North Hempstead, New York. A pastor from a very poor church was preaching out of a basement, by the way, buys a fixer-upper, raises the money to take care of it, renovate it, and all of a sudden, well, it has to be snapped up because it was tagged before he bought it as some kind of development site. So what happens? With all the money that the church put into it, the government gave him $50,000 less than what was invested into it. Here's another one. Port Chester. This is even funnier. Port Chester, there was a guy named Bill Brody, I believe it. Brody or Brady, I think it was Brody or Brody. He's a developer. He bought a bunch of properties to take care of things. You know how these downtown places are. They want to make sure you buy into this whole thing with everything. So he was charged $40,000, I believe. Yeah, $40,000 for sidewalk improvements on the properties he bought. Well, winds up the local government in Port Chester decided that it wanted to do another downtown revamp. Takes the property from this guy. The reason is the guy should have the law said he should have been informed, and everybody should have been informed. He claims he wasn't, but the government put it in this local paper, a little tiny 30-day notice in a local paper for a hearing and to challenge this, and he never got it. So winds up all that investment, the extra money, just taken from him.
By the way, Kelo, which was the basis of the Supreme Court decision, never got built. They never built that shopping mall. Again,
see?
But I just to tell you, this is one of the oldest tricks in the book, sadly.
But you see,
the public notices they put in these little papers that nobody reads.
The danger, though, is you can mount a public campaign or public opinion against the governments in these cases. However, when it comes to fighting climate change and global warming, the media is going to back up the government. So how do you fight back, gentlemen? What are things our listeners and anybody, any homeowner, our listeners, or any activists, anybody that's watching this that is aware of these abuses of eminent domain, aware that a lot of this could happen in the name of the phony climate change agenda, what can we do to fight back?
Well, I think you need to be careful in what state you pick to live in to begin with. I know that if you live in California, I started off running operations there as a very young case officer back in 80, 88, 89. And it's really funny to go to Reseda and to Woodland Hills and find interstates. Literally, it's like Tom Petty in the song, "She living in Reseda." in the song Free Fallin', it's actually accurate. It's like, yeah, she's got a freeway in her backyard. They've literally built freeways through the backyards of these houses. So, people didn't care. It's like, yeah, you need a freeway. Sorry. You need to, I think, pick states which will recognize the individual rights, which are most committed to the Constitution. With that said, that's part of what Project Sentinel is about, is returning governance to the concepts of the Constitution, because speech is related to property, in that if you produce something as part of your intellectual work, one of our board members, and Bennett McFadder, has been through this with the government. He's produced things which are part of his freedom of speech. The idea of patenting something, that's freedom, and the idea of domain, of being aware of someone's domain, of not having the government just coming in and taking things, again, is something that the founding fathers would be turning in their graves over as this thing is developed. And I think we need to basically renew an understanding through education and outreach of the fact that Americans do not have to accept this, and that the judiciary should be the ones really enforcing this, preventing the government from just saying, oh, we want a mall over there, we're just going to take your land. That should not be something that's accepted. And if the government does do it, like in the case of Jay, what Jay was just talking about, they should suffer consequences beyond simply, oh yeah, too bad, we don't need it now. There should be a huge penalty for those in government who do this sort of thing and don't follow through, or do it in disregard to the individual. There should be huge penalties to this. So,
by the way, to the credit of the United States, speaking of the founding fathers turning over in their graves, to the credit of the United States, as bad as we've gotten, we still haven't built roads over graveyards. But in Europe, they do it all the time.
Clearly, these are things we need to watch out for. Pete, any thoughts on fighting back?
I'd start with this. John Adams, who was truly a fascinating and smart guy, made the comment that the foundation of civilization, the real foundation of civilization, reside in two very simple concepts, and they go to right what we're talking about here. Those two concepts are the right of contract, the right essentially to bind yourself, and private property. And both of them speak to this idea that I can buy a piece of land, or my neighbor can buy a piece of land, and we can make a deal to trade that piece of land, or I'm going to buy it from him, he's going to buy it from me, and that is something we have an intrinsic right to do. That is a right that precedes government. And the idea that the government can come in and willy-nilly turn it over, the Kelo agreement there, that's a Central Connecticut, I think, wasn't it? That they, we're going to make a mall here. They take this land out of the hand of the owners. Owners didn't want to sell. They established what the price is. The government established what the price is, and they turn it over to a developer. And then the developer doesn't even develop a mall. I mean, it was just egregious. And these people are left hanging. They're left with a sum of money that they didn't want for a piece of land that they did want, and nothing gets done of it. There is no greater good for the greater number that results from this thing. There is just these people who have been put off their land, and the answer has to be, I think, at the local level, is that whenever you see one of these, you see them all the time. One of these orange signs, and I love it. They put them up on the side of a road where there's no possibility of stopping. You can't stop, unless you want to cause a traffic accident, you can't stop and read the bloody sign. There's a sign. Well, we posted it. We posted it for 30 days. You posted it for 30 days someplace where no one could read it. And the idea here is for government to work, for representative government to work, it's participatory government, and we have to participate. We have to bang on the doors. We have to insist that the city council, the town council, listen to the local folks, and you start at the local level, and you get in their face very politely. I'm not talking about being violent, but you have to get there. You have to show up at the town council meetings. You have to ask them what they're doing. You have to insist that they follow the rules. You have to insist that they provide proper notification. You have to insist they provide good reasons why they're doing things. They have to
give you 2 minutes. You go to the town council to give you 2 minutes to talk.
Yeah, true.
Right. I mean that has to be. You have to push back on that, and it's a pain in the behind, but you have to keep pushing back.
And push back on the local laws too. Again, I'll go back to what we said about Port Chester. The government used a kind of a sneaky loophole. I wouldn't even call it a loophole. It's a direct sneaky law where they can just put a little notice in a tiny paper, and it doesn't matter if the developer is all the way in Nevada. And I'm using that. I don't know where this developer was from, but if the developer, I'm just using it as a hypothetical, developers in Nevada doesn't notice what the local Port Chester paper has to say for a couple of days. You can get blindsided. If you own a property, you're vacationing in Florida for the week, you don't have your local paper, and they wanted your house. Hey, you know what? They warned you. You just didn't see it in a local paper. It's in the law.
Right.
It's on the books. These things need to be fought against. We have to be kind of wary of these things beforehand, and then fight them before the government can take these properties away from people.
There's a newspaper in New York called the Jewish Press. And the Jewish Press it's got about 150 pages in issue, of which maybe 30 or 40 is reporting and columns, and the rest of it is legal notices, because they have a big enough circulation that is technically a legal notice if you put stuff in there, and so all the non-Jews put their legal notices in there because they figured only Jews read it, so the non-Jews are not going to read it. And it's a trick to satisfy the requirement of legal notice, and hope that you guys probably not going to read it. Meanwhile, the Jewish Press is a self-sufficient newspaper only because of that. They don't sell enough advertising, but they sell enough of this space that, it's a win-win, except for the guy with the real lawsuit and the real claim.
And like Pete said, it has to be fought at the local level, because these things can happen. You can fall victim to anything like this. Gentlemen, final thoughts on the situation. We'll start with Tony.
So I think it's important to embrace science, fact, and actual law and traditions rather than accepting the narrative. As Dr. Corsi said earlier, that the left enjoys the benefit of establishing a narrative that has no necessary link to fact. The progressives are very emotional. They use emotion and narrative to drive public sentiment, and it's a very dangerous thing. The idea of doing good is always something they try to manipulate. Again, as I said earlier, the Biden comment, our job is to make democracy deliver for everyone. What does that even mean? It means absolutely nothing. It means that they're going to do things in the name of their political party to undermine the Constitution, to attempt to establish scientific fallacies that they embrace as policy to drive their agenda. That's what they're doing. And so it's time that people wake up. They understand that this is not going to benefit them one iota. And when they talk about trying to move this from the concepts of science and policy into commerce, where they're going to take things from you darn well had better wake up, because otherwise you're going to be having nothing and probably not being all that happy. Just saying.
Exactly. Pete?
Well, I would second what Tony says about the science. One of the great minds of the 20th century, Richard Feynman, truly a groundbreaking nuclear physicist, used to say that the basis of science is questioning authorities, and one of the things you need to watch whenever anybody starts talking about any particular position that says, well, the authorities all say, the scientists all say, that should be a flare, an emergency, pop smoke, that somebody's trying to deceive you. If their defense of their position is to fall back on the credentials of some people who hold that position, rather than falling back on hard fact and scientific argument. And so the idea that 97% of whatever the numbers they're using today agree with, that is an automatic alarm bell. That's the first thing. The second thing is is I would ask everybody to not only question scientific authority, question legal authority, question the town council, question the legislature at your state capitol, question the legislature in Congress. They work for you. You don't work for them, and they're supposed to produce justification, hard justification of why they're doing things, why they're spending your money. Remember, it is your money, not theirs. Why they're doing the things they're doing. So, write that letter. Drop that. You can get online. One of the wonderful things about the world today is you can send an email to your congressman, to your senator, to your governor, to your state rep, to the city council, to the town council, and never leave your desk. And I recommend, and I just sent one out the other day, just yesterday, to some folks. I mean, send a lot of them. Be a pain in the behind. They need to answer to you.
Right.
And Jay.
Well, I'd like to make this point and sort of, in a way, bring together what both Tony and Pete are bringing out, which is that it's interesting. We're all military men to some capacity. We've been in military situations, and the left usually are not. But the left brings a better military mind to the strategy of fighting, legislatively and in the public square. They never have one line of attack. They always have two lines. So if down here they're making some argument, maybe they're calling you names, they'll have some kind of debate. And then even if you think you win the debate, they win because they have the bureaucracy already in place where they're going to make it happen by fiat no matter what happens in the debate. And that's something that people who want to debate the left successfully have to start learning, which is that, you don't don't put all your troops in one place because you might win that battle and lose the war. You have to engage them on all the different levels. And that's why it's so complicated, and it's a fight that never ends. We all have some gray hair, I noticed, and some people behind us are going to have to take up the fight too. But this is a battle for the ages. And then we just had a thunderclap right here.
Yeah, there we go.
So God gave me an exclamation point. That was the real moment.
That's a good thing.
I want to thank all of you for joining us for this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Project Sentinel and the London Centr for Policy Research. You can find out more about both organizations at projectsentinel.net and londoncentr.org. Find out more also. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, other social media sites, Rumble. We also are wherever you get your audio podcasts. Once again, thank you for being with us, and stay informed.